I think the first thing I'd say about this is that I think this story has got a lot of potential. It hasn't fully drawn out the full potential yet, so it's going to need quite a bit of rewriting. But the basic idea of it, I think, is very good, and is also, I think, quite important, in that I've taught a lot of kids, especially I used to teach YTS trainees, and you quite often get kids that were very good verbally, but just couldn't do it on the page. You probably know as a teacher this is quite common. Sometimes some of the most verbally able are the least able to write something. And so this is about that subject. And so I'm very keen on it for that reason. And something I used to do, I remember with some YTS trainees, some had actually been to young offenders institutions, and they would tell me stories about this. And I would record the stories, and then I would myself type them up and give them back to them, what they'd actually said. And it was like, a road to Damascus thing, seeing their own words. It just, I'd say, it opened the eyes of these students to their own ability and to recognising that their lives and things that were relevant to them could actually be in print, and they could actually see it in print. And so to me, this is a story about that. But I think the first thing I would say is at the start that it doesn't quite make sense that he's so excited about this competition when he knows he's not very good at any of the arts at the start. So I would say, wouldn't it be great to win one of these competitions? But how would I? Because I'm used to it. And then he goes back to Grandad and he says, and this is it could be quite amusing that he says, I'd like to, I can't play this instrument, I can't do this, can't do that. So actually, what can I do? Now, the next thing I would say is the Grandad and him, their conversation, it's just really all dialogue. And there's no reason why you can't do that in a story. Although at the first time someone speaks, you want to say said, Grandad, or whatever. So you've established who they are. And then after that, you can just have speech. But I think in this case, it would make the story much better if there was more characterization of the Grandad and their relationship. I'm just going on my own experience again, is that I actually had a relationship a bit like this with my Grandad. And he'd come from a working class family. He'd been a sales rep who'd become a sales manager. He was very witty. He was very intelligent, but he would never have the aspiration to write a story or do anything like that. But I think he could see in me something of him. And so I think that would be a nice thing to have in this story, that the Grandad is someone who is themselves, witty, good verbally, but never has achieved anything, but sees something of himself in this boy. And that would add a little more emotional charge to it. That it's about not just his success, but vicariously the Grandad's success. So I think it needs a bit more characterization, and it needs some more description, not just the dialogue, and a little, nothing overdone, but just something that enough to suggest these things about the Grandad and about their relationship. And then this idea then that the Grandad would be the one that says, actually, you're great at making stories. That's great. So I would definitely have that in it. That it's him that thinks that and says the things you've said, they are like poetry, and makes him realise that. I think possibly it might be better not to actually have the words that he actually said, because it's obviously got to be, it would have been better if it was more of a mystery to the reader exactly what he'd said. So you don't have to try to make a great poem. But the idea then that he's got to write this up, he accepts. Then the actual process of this happening isn't really in the story at the moment. He just, a week later it was finished and he'd read it and so on. But I think the process needs to be in it, because exactly as I'm saying, that moment when you see your own words is a road to Damascus moment. And so it's possible, I think, maybe the Grandad could do what I did and actually record him speaking this little thing he used to do, and then get him to write it up. And then he sees it and he thinks, God, it is poetry. And that's a big moment in the story, that he's realised he can write poetry. So then he takes him to school. And again, I think it's a great idea that he's lost it. That's a real emotional thing, he's he's made this big effort and now he's lost it. He's lost the story. And then we're in a very tense situation with great suspense. But at the moment, that suspense is then lost because he just writes the story again, and because he can remember it, because he did it verbally first of all. But what if he can't find the story? I think that would make this a better story. He can't find the story. He's really totally deflated. He goes to this assembly and they announce the third prize, the second prize. And then they say, we've got another story here, but we don't know who wrote it because he's not put his name on it. So what does he do then? Because now he's actually there and all the kids are there. He knows they could probably laugh at him. And so wouldn't say anything maybe? Wouldn't admit that's his story. It's a nice tense situation you've got there. But then teacher says, it's a shame no one here says they've written it because it would have won. Right? And then I think he would say, hand up, it was me. And then probably no one will believe him. Goes up to the stage. Teacher says, is doubtful about it. But the only way he can prove that he wrote it was he actually recites it. Because he can recite it, because it was something that was in his head in the first place and done verbally in the first place. And so he recites it and everyone is struck dumb. And then they say, okay, you're the winner. And then I think it's got more impact than it is at the moment where he just goes up and they tell him he's the winner. And then I think at the end of the story, at the moment, yeah, from that day on I was not called useless and so on, yeah, fine, but it'll give it a lot more emotional impact if he goes back to his granddad at the end and tells his granddad. And his granddad, you can tell, without overdoing the emotion, that it's what it means to him. You see what it means to him. And then that doubles the emotional impact of the story, because he's fulfilled what his granddad would have loved to have fulfilled. So I think, and if you get that all right, without overdoing the emotion, it could be a very emotional story. I would never say, end up with everyone streaming with tears. That is not the way to do it. It's just selective observations, and just the fact he gives them a massive hug or whatever will show what it means to him. Because there's this saying in creative writing, I may have said it before, but it's show, don't say. If you demonstrate something in an image, it's much better than any other way of doing it, because you can tell someone that someone loves someone, but if you see it, it has a far greater emotional impact. So that's why we say show, don't say. Doesn't mean you can't ever just say something, but that's why we say show, don't say. As you know, you've got 2 weeks now to choose a piece of work and make it your final piece of work. I always say my advice is just advice. You can do whatever you like with your stories, and you can choose whichever story you want to do. But I think I'm going to have to instruct Mike to do this story, to write this story, because he's really got to do this one. So, well done, Mike, and look forward to seeing the revision. Hopefully you'll agree with the things I've suggested here.